The Chicago Bears are embarking on yet another coaching search. Will they get it right this time as they go from Matt Eberflus to whoever? I want a coach who hates to lose, a coach that exudes passion, a guy like Mike Vrabel.
Because it sucks to lose, Gentry.
Trey, ever need to show you anything?
Did you have another thought or no? I'm just curious.
Well,
It sucks.
is that
Losing. Awful. That's why I want to win. Because you don't sleep. You want to win for the players that bust their tail. That's it. You know what I mean? It's not about, hey, we'll go into the offseason with a good note. Nobody knows what you did on January 7th or 8th or 6th in April when you come back. But, you know, you want to see, you know, just it all come together. And just put 4 quarters together. You know, win a game like we talked about. You come in here, well, you close game. Yeah, we feel the same way. You know, in that game the other day, you know, we got to put ourselves into a competitive game where it's, you know, back and forth, and there's some field position, and then you score, and you take care of the football. And we just hadn't done that in the opportunities that we had, that were like, okay, we fought and we were close, but I think that's why. You know, you just put yourself in a competitive situation, you know, come up with a way to, you know, make a play in the second half to win the game. That's what I hope for. Sorry about my language.
Welcome into a special edition of our Bears Recap. I'm David Kaplan here on our Recap YouTube channel. It's a special edition as the coaching search is rolling on now for our Bears. A look at Mike Vrabel, and you just heard the passion that Mike Vrabel speaks with. The man he was talking to was Gentry Estes. He's the lead columnist for the Tennessean. So, Gentry, we just played this eloquent Mike Vrabel bite where he is, "That all you got, Gentry? Losing effing sucks." And what was take us back to that moment. What were you thinking?
the setup to that, and I don't think people really understood at the time necessarily. He had said this was the last game week of the season. Titans had a terrible season. They were playing Jacksonville in a game that had no meaning at all for them. Mm-hmm. And he came to a press conference and said, this game is important to us for a lot of reasons. Mm-hmm. So I followed up and said, okay, what are those reasons? And that's what got Mike going. And, you know, because I'm thinking when you hear a coach say that, it's like, well, are people going to get fired? I mean, like, what does that mean? And I thought it was one of the best answers Mike Vrabel gave during his whole time as the Titans coach. I thought it really did offer some insight into just kind of everything they'd been dealing with and the struggles of that season, but also just the mentality of any NFL organization, especially when things aren't going well, and the frustration that I think had built up with the Titans at that point. And you know, Titans ended up winning that game that week. They kept the Jags out of the playoffs last year by beating them. And Vrabel got fired anyway, so there you go.
In terms of looking, and you're not covering the Bears, I have been for 30-plus years, and it's so super frustrating that, you know, Matt LaFleur, who came from Tennessee, went to the Packers. He's 11-0 lifetime coaching against the Bears as the Packers head coach. Matt Eberflus was a nice man, probably a pretty good DC. Terrible as a head coach, and yet here we have this, you know, quote-unquote, generational rookie quarterback that even Bill Belichick said he thought that the Bears job was the most attractive out there. Players have said to me, we have got to get the culture in our room fixed. Mike Vrabel, as one player said to me, would be the perfect guy to fix what's going on in Chicago. You covered the man. What do you think of him?
I could maybe guess what player that was. No, I do agree with that. I always felt like, you know, I covered Vrabel for 5 years as the Titans coach, everything other than his first year. I came here in 2019, and I do think the culture on that team was the type that allowed, for most of his time here, look, there were some good players that went in and out of this franchise. But for most of the time here, I think you would look at the Titans under Mike Vrabel as a team that was better than the sum of its parts. Every year it seemed as though they would win the division. They were the number one seed in the AFC one year. They went to the AFC title game. And I think there were a lot of, you would get a sense from a national perspective, a lot of people would ask, how are they doing this? Because when you look, A.J. Brown, Derrick Henry, I mean, these were very good players, but I think top to bottom, they were never one of those teams that people looked at, quite honestly, the way people probably look at the Bears now, or at least going into the season. A lot of big name offensive skill guys, the big time rookie quarterback. Titans never had that buzz about them, but yet they kept winning. They endured a ton of injuries over the course of several seasons to a ridiculous extent, honestly, and kept winning. And I always thought that was a credit to the coaches, and particularly Mike Vrabel. I think he was very good at establishing a culture of toughness in the locker room. And everybody talks about that, but he actually did it. And I feel as though that he got more out of that team than I think a lot of coaches would have. And, in the NFL, I've always believed that, 80, 90% of coaches, if you gave them the right team and the right talent, they could win. But I think it's a very small number that if they don't necessarily have the right talent, they can still win. And there were times in Tennessee where Vrabel looked to be one of those guys.
In terms of the dealings he had with his players, with you, men and women in the Tennessee media, we've got a lot here. The Bears we've got the Cubs, the Sox, the Bears, the Bulls, the Blackhawks, but the Bears are far and away the needle mover. It's crazy the intensity that the fan base brings. I look at Mike Vrabel and go, if that dude wins here, he will own this town, because press conferences like his exchange with you, those will go insane here.
Yeah.
Do you think he's the right fit from the outside looking in?
I mean, everybody thinks of Mike Ditka, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's from in a modern era. You're talking about a coach who, I know Buddy Ryan was a big part of it, but won a Super Bowl there, and I still feel like that's kind of the emblematic, what you would expect the Chicago Bears coach to be. And I do think Mike Vrabel's a good fit for that. I do, and I feel as though, from a media perspective, he isn't always a fan of it. He wasn't always, real eager to want to give information and be a part of it. But I do feel like he has a mentality and a way with the media that would do well in a market that size. I think it would, you're looking at the jobs out here, and we've talked about this a lot here, is I think a lot of people were surprised that Vrabel didn't get a job this last cycle. There were a lot of reasons behind what happened in Tennessee. And I don't necessarily, in hindsight, they've had a terrible season. The Titans have had a terrible season this year. So there's a lot of people who are looking back on it and goes, gosh, how in the world could they get rid of Vrabel? At the time, it did make some sense, only because I feel as though it had run its course a little bit. There were some relationship things in the building, and it kind of built up to a point that it may not have been sustainable anymore. That wasn't all on Mike. I think some of it was, but I think some of it was on ownership. I think some of it was just on kind of the fact that the roster had been deteriorating. And again, I think it just ran its course. A coach like Vrabel, maybe his message wasn't getting through as much as it was when they were successful. At least toward the end of, last season, they go 6-11, and I think they were just kind of looking to change things up. But even still, the response among the Titans and their fan base was, nobody thought Vrabel wasn't a good coach. Most people in the media, people like myself, everyone said, that guy's going to go somewhere and win. I'd bet on it. We thought it would be sooner rather than later. I mean, everybody thought he would get a job this last cycle. He didn't, but I think now when you're kind of looking ahead and saying, okay, what are the jobs are going to be open? What makes the most sense to me? The Bears are pretty high on that list. I think that's a good fit, and I do think it's a good job for a lot of reasons, for the right coach to go in there and be able to work with obviously a really promising young quarterback, a good offense. And, Vrabel's more of a defensive guy, so I think he would. If there's one thing that I would take pause about in him for that job is, you had a defensive guy, so now you're going to have to. If you bring in an offensive coach, and he does an offensive head coach, he's not going to leave for another job. Whereas if you
Correct.
get a defensive guy and you bring in a great offensive coordinator who meshes with Caleb Williams, now all of a sudden he's going to get a job somewhere else, and you got a new system, and it's gonna maybe slow his growth a little bit. So that's the one thing I'd look at that and say maybe an offensive head coach would make more sense.
The other thing, though, is you look at, we'll take the Bills. Sean McDermott is a defensive head coach. He lost Dable. He's had some movement at OC, and guess what? Josh Allen just keeps getting better.
Mm-hmm. If you got the right quarterback, you got the right quarterback.
Correct. If this kid, and we all believe he is, if he is the right quarterback, who's a guy you think he would, talk about Vrabel, look at as an offensive coordinator? Because Arthur Smith, who he had success with, is now in Pittsburgh. He's not leaving to come here. Mm-hmm. And Matt LaFleur is the head coach of the Green Bay Packers. Does he have someone in his past that you went, that guy probably goes with him?
Probably Tim Kelly. That would be my guess. Tim Kelly was the he had been the OC with the Houston Texans for during that duration where they were kind of wandering the wilderness a little bit. He was their OC with David Culley, and he is the brother of Dennis Kelly, who was an offensive tackle in the league as well. And actually, it didn't go real well for the Titans last season, but I think Tim Kelly did a pretty good job. I mean, they'd had Todd Downing before him, who ended up, he's in New York now, but I felt like Tim Kelly was an upgrade over what they had there. So Vrabel, that's one thing. If he goes there, and I think the media there will learn it, he has a tight-knit group of people that he's loyal to and are loyal to him. And he likes to hire from within that group.
If I said to you, give a message to the current members of the Chicago Bears if indeed Mike Vrabel becomes their new head coach, what would you say to them? Because when Mike Ditka got here, I remember players going, oh, God, things have changed.
Yeah, I mean, I think Vrabel was an interesting case because you would have some players that would say he's a player's coach because he was a former player. He understands a lot of what they're going through in terms of just scheduling and how things are set up. I felt like he wouldn't ask too much in practices, especially during the season. He would allow the veterans to kind of figure things. So I think there are some aspects of how he would approach this job that I think would be something that the players would really like and respond to. But there is also, he's all about business in a lot of ways. I don't think I don't think there would be, families in the locker room or friends hanging out. I think it would be, it would just be a very business-like approach. And look, the way it works in the NFL, right? If you're doing things a certain way and you end up getting fired, the next guy comes in and goes, gosh, he's letting the players be themselves and he's letting, this is what we needed. Then that doesn't work. You fire that guy and then you bring in another one. It's like, well, we need a culture of toughness. We need a disciplinarian to come in here. So I don't know what Matt Eberflus was on that, but whatever he was, people would be happy at how Vrabel handles this because that's just how it is with a new coach. They would go, it's so refreshing. We needed that.
Yeah, the perception, and I saw Ian Rappaport write this, Albert Breer, Adam Schefter, that the Bears want a leader of men. It seems to me, and you were around him, I'm not, that's Mike Vrabel.
Mike Vrabel is an extremely good football coach. And I think that's kind of the summation of everything we're talking about here. I've been around, in my career, I've kind of been all over the place in the South and been around a lot of really good coaches. And, he's up there. He's somebody that when you cover him, you kind of learn what it's supposed to look like in a lot of ways. And, I've also been in situations too where the message can get stale for any coach, especially one that's asking so much. And I'm going to say demanding is the right word, but he got a lot out of a little, a lot of times in the Titans. And I just felt like that had run its course. I felt like the message had kind of gotten stale and it just wasn't going to keep working. So if there is a drawback to that sort of thing, is it might have an expiration date on it, but the man's going to win a lot of football games wherever he goes.
Last thing for you, do you think he would play quote unquote nice in the sandbox with whether it's the team president who's not a football guy or his GM, which one's in place, and Ryan Poles, who's a good guy, and George McCaskey, who has won in the 13 years that he's been the chairman of the board. He's got exactly 0 playoff wins, and he's got to get this fixed this time.
It's a fair question because I think that's a lot of what led to the undoing of everything here in Tennessee. Mike is a strong personality. He's going to be a strong personality wherever he goes. He's going to make his voice heard. He's going to have a very strong conviction on how things should be done, and he's going to want it done that way. That said, you would hope that maybe he learned a little from the experience in Tennessee in terms of, the corporate culture of how it works in the NFL. Because I do feel like had that part of things gone a little better, and again, not all on him. A lot of this was on the ownership. There was a whole thing with the GM. John Robinson got fired. They replaced him with a guy, and it didn't mesh with Vrabel. There was a whole lot. There was a lot that went into that wasn't necessarily an indictment of Mike Vrabel's inability to get along well with others. But he could have done better, and he did, probably. I think if he looked back at everything, there's probably some things he could have done differently. And I do think he will be a better coach for that moving forward for having experienced that. This was his first head coaching job. A lot of things went right on the field. There were a lot of things that the Titans got better when he was here. They were a good football team when he was here until they weren't anymore. And when things went south, I just felt like, everything kind of broke down from a relationship standpoint. And I think, for anybody, you learn as you develop. And I would imagine, I don't know if Mike would ever say it, but I bet he'd probably learn from that to make that aspect of the job. He would be stronger, I believe, at the next place.
Gentry, thank you for your time, my man. I really appreciate it. And that's the guy I think they need. We're going to find out in the next month if Mike Vrabel is indeed the next guy up for the Bears.
You bet. Take care.
Take care.